I keep from singing?
And indeed, how can I keep from singing? This is Lyndol Descant, and I'm here today on this lovely Tuesday to talk music as a metaphor with you. I'm a singing pianist, music teacher, a bit of a Renaissance woman, and I felt the calling of recent to step up and use my voice to inspire and talk to other like-minded people out there as we live through these very interesting times about reclaiming our power and in particular using music to do that. So today we're going to get into a bit about Holy Week because it will be Easter this Sunday, and Holy Week brings a lot of significance, a lot of depth, a lot of introspection for me. And so I'd like to discuss a little bit about an idea that I brought up last week, getting into alignment with God, using your life in service of God's, the ways that I use the metaphor that you're in a symphony and you're in alignment with love, with the all, with nature, that attunement, because it feels so much like so many of us have fallen out and we don't know how to get back. So we're going to talk a little bit more, but more specifically using music improvisation to help yourself get in line with your own intuition and align with spirit again. So we're going to talk about that and listen to a song that I wrote a while back called Will of God that sort of speaks to that subject. And then I want to get into this production that you're hearing. I've been able to add some vocals in on my theme song, do a little bit of work on that. And then there's some late breaking news about PDiddy fleeing the country. So we're going to talk a little bit about some music news and finally round it out with Mozart's Ode to Joy, his Ninth Symphony. I had an amazing experience last week with it, and I want to talk that. So yeah, lots of things to talk about. This is Lyndol Descant, and you're listening to Music as a Metaphor. Great. So, believe we're rocking and rolling here, doing pretty good. I'm checking all of my levels, and so what we're going to talk about today is Holy Week. Now, to be honest with you, I'm a music teacher who's taught for over 15 years, and I don't really speak about my own spirituality or my own journey much in context of my professional music life. That's for many reasons, one of which was that I was surrounded by evangelicals growing up, and I was raised as a Catholic. And so we were on the outs, we were sort of ostracized and demonized a bit. And I wasn't really sure about my spirituality. I was certainly open to discussions, but a lot of times those weren't discussions. They were bullying and, it basically pushed me further away from any sort of talk of Jesus, made me very uncomfortable. It sent me on my own long search where I basically looked everywhere but Jesus for the answers. And so when I finally came back to it, basically when I was studying by myself in Paris alone, late 20s, early 30s, I read a book, The Course in Miracles, which is considered blasphemous by many Christians. But for me, it brought me back into a relationship with Jesus. And truthfully, it was one of those feelings like I was called back because I had had a series of dreams and a series of things that had happened before I was even open to it that felt right for me. And so ever since then, it hasn't been about speaking openly as much, but more living, living from this place of love and living from a place that it's from the inside that you can really find your way, find the answers, and that it's not for me to bully somebody or push my opinion. I'm perfectly happy pushing music on people because I really believe that it's a universal that can open you up to the right answers and to alignment for you. But I really was never comfortable speaking about it. The whole time I was in Brooklyn, I never spoke about it, but I would always put it into my music and put it into my art. It was in my heart. It was what I was, studying on my own. It was very important to me, but it wasn't something that I felt the need to go around and evangelize about. Now that shifted a little bit because the strange thing is by the end of my stay in Brooklyn, which was around 2020, it had gone the other direction, that I wasn't out pushing my ideas, but I was having a lot of ideas pushed on me that were contrary to what I believed in, and I wasn't allowed, or it was like the reverse had happened. These weren't the religious people, but they were being very religious, like pushing their ideas and being like basically pushing a religion that was supposedly not a religion. So that's why I've realized since then that in many ways we do have to stand up for who we are and what we believe in. And so that's part of the reason that I'm speaking on this today, is because this is my voice. This is what's important to me. But I would like to do it in a way that's inspiring to other people to find their answers, and merely as this is what I have to offer. This is my life is like a piece of art that I can offer for the collective. And in coming to my own answers, I guess the funny thing is I think in some ways I've had voice dysmorphia, something that I've spoken on recent episodes about. I've had voice dysmorphia as it relates to using my speaking voice and being able to speak my beliefs without cowering, or without being afraid of being bullied or shut down. Because so often in my life, long before I, came to Jesus, just my ideas about things were often just what people, they were more spiritual in nature. And because I never bought into the completely materialistic mindset, it was often that I was saying the thing that was triggering somebody or making them angry for whatever reason. And looking back, I wonder sometimes the world we live in, if that's not kind of an Agent Smith type of reaction from people, that we aren't being sort of from a vibrational, if it's more about the vibration that you're speaking from, and if you're coming from a loving place or an expansive place or a place that's reaching beyond sort of a prison of logic, or as David Icke likes to say, the postage stamp consensus. When you're reaching out of that, you get smacked down by the people around you. And that had happened so often to me that I really was only comfortable sharing through art and music, where I could use more symbols or poetry. And I'm stepping out of that a bit, because I recognize in the world we live in today, we have to be brave and courageous and honest. So I'm coming out of my own voice dysmorphia a bit, talking today about my views, but it's also because, like I mentioned, it's Holy Week, and I think it's right. I think this is me coming more into my alignment. And so I share this from a place of humility. That in my early 20s, when I was in this place, searching, I had basically come awake to the fact that what we're taught is the world is not truly the world, and that you have to go to the spiritual to start to get some answers. I stumbled across going to Fish concerts, Fish with a PH. So I was at the time pretty closed down. I think I'd mentioned on a previous show that I sort of had two sides to me. I had this secret side that was, exploring and thinking, very, still connected to spirit, still connected to the great mystery, if you will. And another part of me that was very much in the world and wanted to get along with the world, and had this persona and was filled with fear, and often dealt with pretty intense depression for a young person. Felt pretty lost and confused because I just couldn't seem to completely be at home in the world or be uncomfortable with things. And suddenly in college, I started going to Fish shows, and I will admit some psychedelics were involved, and it opened up. It was like it went from that thinking logic into actual experience. And those experiences showed me that there was so much more than what we were being told is part of reality. Those fish shows changed my life. And to this day, I think Fish is one of the absolute most incredible bands out there right now. It's such a well kept secret. They're huge in certain circles. I mean, absolutely huge. But, like, for example, the whole time I was in Europe, I didn't meet one person who had heard of Fish. And I know many, many people in the United States that know of Fish, but have never been to a Fish concert. And even if they had it, sometimes it doesn't take. I remember I had to go to 2 concerts in a row. And the first one, I was just like watching everybody get into it, but I wasn't into it. And then there was something that happened in the second show that I was at that it just opened me up. It was an experience that many people are talking today when they talk about psychedelics. It's an experience where suddenly the colors shifted and I knew more of who I was. I felt so much love and peace. And the thing was, though, after these concerts, I'd go right back to who I was, right? Right back to these programs, right back to this fear, right back to this depression. And so it became clear to me through this process that I needed to find that without Fish and without the aid of psychedelics. I wanted to figure out what that was, that expansion that I felt, that way of viewing the world, that way of being, without being dependent on psychedelics. And so that's what led me, honestly, truly, to wanting to study music, and in particular, wanting to explore improvisation. Because, and I can confirm this, I at the time I had this suspicion, and I honestly can say I was right, after, almost 30 years later, um, that music is so vast that it takes both sides of our brain. It can be very, very logical. It also can be very, very creative. I think some of the best music and the music that we love the most is a combination, but it's entirely possible to stay in your left brain with it. It's entirely possible to just make it mathematical and logical and stay right there with it and not be in the moment, right? Because, like, for example, with classical music, you have to get so good at the technique and know the song so well, and then be such a great musician that's when I think you start to transcend it and really get back into this expanded moment with it. But improvisation demands that it absolutely demands that. Like, you can't fake it, right? Like, the amazing thing about improvisation, if you've never gone to see it live, is that sometimes it's great and sometimes it's bad, and your audience knows that, and they're willing to do that. They're willing to put up with the risk, because you can't make spirit show up. You can't make yourself inspired, but you can do the work to be ready for it when it's there. And so I had I was so fortunate in my 20s and early 30s to really, it was mainly more my 20s though, to be honest, to be on the local scene. I mean, there was a lot of bands in the 90s that were in that jam band movement. So there was, levels of improvisation. Some were more improvisation, some were more structured songs that had solos, but it was always that, right? You always got some pure just experiencing the moment, and it would pull you in. It would pull the audience in. It's like the musicians were feeding off the audience attention and their ability to really actively listen. And before this, my mind was all over the place. I still struggle with focus. I still struggle with a very busy mind that wants to think about everything I need to do. So when you go to these concerts, that's what it was. It was like zoned out. You just started listening to nothing but one note at a time, one moment at a time. And the next thing you know, you're in that place where time doesn't exist. You don't feel stress. You're just in the moment. And the amazing thing, and the reason why I don't need to get into religious or what they call Christianese, is that what I have found is that all you have to do is lead somebody to the moment. If they can get in truly present, suddenly the fear just doesn't make sense anymore. The fear disappears like clouds. It was all a mist. It was all a lie. And in reality, in the moment when you're truly present, it is love. It is expansion. You are taken care of. Somehow the universe, God, is personal and gigantic at the same time. And you are more than you ever thought you were, yet you're still you. And all these experiences are for anybody. Anybody can have this experience. You don't need to study the Bible. You don't need to study yoga. Any of that is yours. And there's a million different ways that people have found to get in. But the point is, you have to do it. You have to figure out how to calm your mind and get present. And that's way harder than people think. It's way harder. Now, psychedelics were something that helped me to experience that, but it became very clear that you could get addicted to that, and that there was it was like a lot, it was diminishing return. The more you did them, then the more negative things that would, you were kind of taking a shortcut in a way. And maybe it was a shortcut given by God and the natural world. I certainly think for me, I never would have even known that existed had it not been for psychedelics, and in particular hearing the music of Fish, and even Dave Matthews, and who are some of the other jam bands I heard? String Cheese Incident, Breathe Love, Soul Hat, Sister Seven. These are some of the more local Austin bands that I don't know if they ever made it big, but they were fantastic back in the day. And once a week, twice a week, you were out and your mind was stopping, and you were just, by consciously focusing your left brain on the music, your right brain was free to come online for you. And it didn't always happen, but it was a skill. Like, you could start to really, it's one of the things I really advocate, active listening. So if you're somebody who doesn't know what I'm talking about, active listening is a great first step. It really is the practice of, it's like meditation. You're listening to a piece of music. Every time your mind wanders, you bring it back. You bring it back. You bring it back. And in particular, if it's music that you can emotionally connect to, then you can start to get to that transcendent place. And once you experience that transcendent place, it'll keep you coming back. And it's a great form of meditation. And in some cases, you might start to realize some of the music you've been listening to is crap. Because when you're actually really listening to some of this music, you're like, no, this vibe is terrible. I don't want to be present with this vibe, right? But active listening is a skill that many people have lost. It's not really being taught. And so many of my students, young and old, have a diminishing focus, especially even in the last 3 or 4 years. It's really decelerated in the last few years, where they are having a very hard time staying focused. So active listening is a great exercise for anybody, but in particular, it can help you to understand what I'm talking about. Really getting into that place where your intuition comes online. Because once you're present, now we're talking about alignment again. Now we're talking about being aligned with whatever is the truth, whatever is real, whatever it is that we've been so distracted from, right? It's like constant distraction from just being present, thinking about the future, thinking about the past, being afraid about this or being proud about that. We're so up in our thoughts that presence is about the body too. It's not a mental thing. We can be so many people, so many of us are living in a fantasy world in our mind of what's to come and what's been. But really, it's about embodiment. And even in the spiritual communities, they're starting to get more and more into this idea of being embodied. And being present is about being in the body. This is another reason why dancing, when you're active listening to music, can really help, because it brings you back into the body. Being focused on rhythm, being in drum circles, can bring you back into your body. And it's a different form of thinking. It is still thinking, but it's not those thoughts. And you start to get to a place where you recognize a lot of your thoughts are not actually your thoughts. Okay, they're programs. They're possibly, who knows these days? It could be voice to skull technology. It could be entities. It could be you're psychically picking up on people around you. There could be ghosts around you. When you really, it's like a radio station, and when you're physically present with yourself, when you start to embody, then you can discern better. But when you're not present and you're just in that left brain place and you think you're identified with yourself, you might actually be identifying with a lot of things that aren't even you. So that's why this alignment is important. And this is why improvisation, first, just listening to music, and in particular, when you're listening to bands that did improvisation, which almost everybody improvised, or I'm not going to say everybody, but most music had forms of improvisation. Since the 80s and Clear Channel, when songs had to be radio ready and they had to be like 3 minutes, that's whenever all the bands kind of quit doing that and also kind of started going down this AI, what I think is leading to AI, where it's like, oh, make it perfect. Like, make these decisions so that you can just be absolutely perfect every time you play it. Make the studio versions perfect. Play it the way the studio version, play it. And all of that has been leading us down this road where music is supposed to be perfect, like note for note perfect. But man, when you listen to stuff from the 70s, it wasn't about being perfect at all. It was about being present. And it's about, oh gosh, something that's even hard to put into words. So when you listen to those guys, when it's almost like that entrainment idea, like if I'm walk into a room and I'm fully present, my vibration is going to make it easier for the person next to me, for them to get fully present. I'm going to be if I walk in full of distractions, like, oh, I'm worrying about all this, even if I don't say a word, I'm going to be pulling that person off next to me through entrainment. I'm going to be pulling them more into a distraction. They're going to have to work harder to stay present. But when I walk in full of presence, they're going to be, it's going to be easier for them to fall into being present with themselves. They might not even know why, right? And this is why some of these spiritual leaders, people just want to be around them, because when they're around them, suddenly they are more fully present. They are more in tune. They're back in alignment, and it feels so natural and right. It doesn't make sense that we're not always in that place. When you experience it, it doesn't make sense that we're not there most of the time, if not all of the time. And so this is what happens when you listen to somebody who's improvising, because the reality of this is my conjecture, but the reality is that to be in improvisation, you have to trust. Okay, even when you're doing jazz improvisation, which has a lot of structure to it, you still have to take the risk. And it's doing that, it's letting go of that logical mind, letting go of control that allows this spirit to come back in, your spirit, a connection to spirit. I don't know. I don't really understand it entirely, and I don't need to understand it, because what we're talking about is experience, and we have such an emphasis on understanding things, but this isn't about understanding it. Trust me, I understood it way longer and for many, many more years than I've actually been able to experience it. It's the experience that is more like the character ethic we talked about last week. The experience is what takes the daily practice. The experience is what takes the patience. And in that experiential place, you're able to align. And when you're listening to musicians that are trusting and taking that risk, and they've trained themselves time and again to get past the fear, get past the logic, get past the control that we all have, and instead they just trust. Well, now you're going to be entrained about by listening to that music. It's going to pull you into that vibe. It's going to teach you. And that's what I experienced back then. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to learn how to improvise in music more than anything else. But what I did find was that when I got into improvisation in music, that songs came out very naturally. Like, improvisation also connected me with a lot of songs that I heard in my head, and that sort of came from a place beyond that I wanted to give birth. And I sort of found an identity as a songwriter through that process. But I, to this day, stay in the styles that I heard more in the 70s, which was being loose, being free, taking risk, allowing yourself to make mistakes so that you can find these open doors to a whole nother room that you didn't plan on, but that's way better than what you planned on, right? You're being led by the spirit at that point. You have to be willing to be led in a certain way. And it's through that I believe that you start to get back into alignment with what I would call God's will. But as I mentioned last week, I I don't want to get into too strict of definitions, because it's more about, it's more beyond my words to discuss. But where I believe this place is where we're all connected, and that it's good for everybody. It's a place where there's room for everybody. There's enough for everybody. There's love for everybody. It's that place that I'm talking about, that alignment. And it's it's the training through the process, which it's taken me a very long time to work on improvisation. It was honestly much harder than I thought. But it's one of the things I teach a lot of students. You can start improvising from day one, right, on an instrument. And I recommend that because it's a lot like a faucet that you have to turn on. And at first it's a drip, but the more you keep that faucet, more you keep going back to that faucet, the more that will flow until eventually it's a full on, the faucet is turned on hot and cold, and you have a lot more access to that water. But many, many people, one of the things I experienced in France in particular was that you have to get good at the technique and then you can improvise. And I don't agree with that at all. I think right from the start, you want the right and the left brain working together. You want to practice being able to focus on your technique while the right brain and the imagination and the spirit is pouring through you, because sometimes it can feel like wild horses coming through you, and you lose, a lot of times you lose your ability to hold on to your technique. That's where the training comes in. And so our improvisation is a lost art. I believe it's something that, even Bach improvised. It is not that hard once you understand the fundamentals of music and you have the willingness to take risk, and you are able, it's not hard to do. What might be a little bit harder to do is to develop your own style and to really be able to play accurately what you hear. To this day, there's things that I hear that my hands are still not able to play. So that's a dexterity issue in my hands. That's, becoming a more pure instrument. There's a little bit of activity behind me. My apologies, but the becoming a pure instrument for the divine, and that sort of was the goal from day one for me, is to train myself to very perfectly play the music of the divine. And in that way, it was also about aligning my will with God's will, because it was very clear that I had my own agendas and that they weren't in alignment with God. And that when that was the case, I oftentimes was doing things that I very much regretted. Either they hurt myself or they hurt other people. Whereas when I've been able to follow my intuition and be in alignment with divine will, it ends up being great for everybody. It ends up being miraculous. It ends up being better than I ever could have imagined or planned. So that's this song that I wrote a long time ago. This is actually off it's not my first album. It's not even my second album now that I think about it. But it's my first album I released after being out on the music scene in New York as a pro. And this song in particular was a song that I don't really remember when I wrote it. And it hasn't been one that I've played a lot since then, to be honest with you. But it seemed like the right one to play this week, as I wanted to be more spirit focused this week, be more meditative and mindful. And so I'd like to play this song for you now. It's called Will of God, and then we'll discuss it. That wasn't it. Let me see here. That was not it. Let me do this one more time. Okay. This is off of my album called Reach Up. Inside my mind, and the cleanup seems impossible. A dark wish from long ago, and it multiplied, and multiplied, and multiplied, and cloned itself a million different
it were the will of God. And how I missed the will of God. But God's will stands aloof, or perhaps it's just too obvious to see, or recognize its existence right in front of me, in front of me, in front of me. So now I pray for the will of God. So now I hope to know the will of God. So now I pray to see the will of God. So now I hope to know the love of God.
Okay. That made me a little emotional. Wow. So that's the song, Will of God. I really haven't listened to it too much. Probably, been at least 5-10 years since I've listened to it. So where to begin on that? Well, first of all, when I write songs, a lot of times, at least back in the day, and I guess I still do this to a certain degree, they were mantras, sort of that old affirmations, like putting affirmations to music. So I know when I wrote that, I was coming to a place where I recognized that even though I intended to follow the will of God, I was less rebellious than I was in my 20s, where I knew I was like in active rebellion. Like I would know that God was telling me, like in one particular instance with a relationship, that I needed to walk away, and I just was like, no, I'm not going to. And the misery that ensued for me and others because of that absolutely taught me that by my 30s, was like, okay, no, I actually do want to just listen to that intuition, go ahead and quit being so rebellious. And at that point, though, it wasn't a question of just, I wanted to at that point, but then I still had these programs. I still had these, it was like the discipline to follow it. And sometimes it wasn't even just discipline. I mean, I had to, I would catch myself doing something and these cycles, these patterns, and it was so painful because I would, sometimes it wasn't exactly clear to me what was the right thing to do in something. So there was still some trial and error trying to discern, really what was the will and how to listen to it correctly, as opposed to just my own ego, because my own ego can be very deceptive and loves to actually hijack my spirituality in many ways. But then there was times when I knew I wanted to do something and I couldn't, and it was awful to watch myself self-sabotage is the word. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but it just felt like it was never ending. And that was these patterns, that was these programs that were so deeply ingrained with me that I had to do that deep shadow work. So this was an affirmation at the time that I would get to a place where I felt like I really was living the will of God, that I knew the will of God. The last verse, it was a progressive thing. The song is progressive, which I like to do in songs a lot too. The beginning is where I came from. The middle was where I was, like in this active process of trying to work this out. And then the final verse was where I was going to go, or the final chorus was where I wanted to be. And I have to say that, like, that's why I think I'm a little bit emotional, it's the recognition that song did work because I'm in a place where I'm feeling that I'm not going to say 100% of the time, but certainly my discernment and my discipline and my will I have improved greatly since I did write this song, and I'm very thankful for that today. And really, this is a song, I mean, you could look at it a few different ways. It's about original sin and how do we come out from underneath that, because those patterns that I had to face, they weren't all mine. I mean, in many ways, they were ancestral through my bloodline, through my family line, and I'm still working out. This is the work. This is the shadow work, the great work, as I've called it, of bringing these things to the surface and healing them, this, and being free then to follow the will of God, because I didn't feel free. Once I knew with absolute certainty that I wanted to follow the will of God, then it was about becoming free of these cycles that kept me chained to self-sabotaging behaviors. So, hallelujah on that front. So yeah, to change gears a little bit, to talk about the production on that, because I like to talk a little bit nuts and bolts on that too. I can hear when I'm listening back now, I probably would do a cleaner production at this point. What I did back then, that was a situation where I laid down all the instruments in Logic Pro, and then I went to Casey Holford to record the vocals, because at the time I just couldn't get good vocals. I have better vocals now, but it depends on, what level of professionality, what level of production. But back then I really couldn't get vocals at all. There was always an echo. And so I went to Casey, got the vocals done, and then he mixed and mastered it for me. I don't really believe he cleaned it up much either, but he might have. Did he use an auto-tune in my voice? I really don't even know. I'm going to guess no by some of it, but that is just so that's the production. That's sort of a split production where it's mostly produced by me, by yours truly, and then mixed and mastered and the vocals done by a more professional, Casey Holford out of Brooklyn. And I also wanted to mention that there's times, especially back then, that beginner's luck kind of thing. There was times when I would have more than one track and somehow it would kind of come together miraculously, and I would like it. A lot of times when I'm doing productions, I do feel like the Spirit comes through and just kind of does things that is better than what I could do, like weird, crazy things. And so some of that happened with that, but some of it I can also hear that the way I produce now, I'd probably clean it up more, make it a little bit more precise in areas, in particular the bass with the drums. But that's where, sometimes it's better to not know, because by doing that, by being cleaner and kind of having these rules and these industry standards, and do I start to squeeze out the creativity? Some of those happy accidents happen less because I'm a little bit more of a skilled producer at this point? I would say yes. So that's why if you're in the beginning stages, wear that badge and go boldly, because sometimes the things you do there later are a lot harder once your logic is more developed, and it can squeeze out your creativity, as well as maybe make decisions that are more conforming. But it's like a lot of what I was talking about last week. Then you start to get into formulas, and you start to get into you lose some of that inspiration. Things become more rote. It's more safe at that point. It's going to be accepted. But it's less on that edge, which is where I think the spirit likes to be, likes to walk that line, right? So that's the basics of that. That's for the most part what I want to discuss about that today. I wanted to thank those that have been listening, because I've been getting some really nice feedback, and really appreciate hearing from you guys. In particular, voice dysmorphia seemed to strike a chord with a lot of people. And I'm right there with you. It's going to be a lifelong thing, because as I'm becoming more and more comfortable with my singing voice, now I'm back out on the edge, out of my comfort zone with speaking about these subjects that I've been comfortable speaking with to some of my students, but mostly these have just been things that I've been journaling about or writing about or thinking about on my own, sharing with only a few people. So I'm stepping out and just contributing my voice in the hopes, because, well, I'm basically hoping to inspire other people too, because I don't think it's about being perfect, and it's not about me sharing this, saying this is how you should think. I think it's about all of us putting our gifts or putting our voice forward, because we're all needed right now. I just heard some crazy story about a bridge collapsing in Baltimore. Anxiety is off the charts with most people, whether they're aware of what's going on or not. We are living in very strange times right now. And I'm not here to say that I know what's going on, but I am here to offer my voice and my opinion, because I know there's so many other brave people who are doing the same thing. And I've really appreciated their listening to them over the last few years. I don't know that any of us know exactly what's going on, but I certainly think that the more that we're able to share our voices with each other in a spirit of unity, then the more we can help each other get through this time and to stay healthy and inspired and creative. And rather than become consumers, to produce what we can and to put it out there. Just want to make sure that I'm still connected. Okay, so we have about 15 minutes left. So PDiddy. Well, I don't know. To be honest, I've never been a hip hop person. It's just never been a form of music that I super love. I think I missed it when it was really good. And I did enjoy hip hop when hip hop really started to get to my soul, was when I lived in Brooklyn for a decade. There, I got it. It was an art form that absolutely spoke to me and made sense. It was something about really living in that urban environment, and there in Brooklyn, maybe being close to some of its roots. I listened to more of the old school stuff. I liked a lot of Lauryn Hill. But just in general, it would be the right vibe, over and over again. And I had a couple experiences, and I still would like to collaborate with more hip hop artists. I had a couple experiences where I had some hip hop artists, collaborate with me, and I loved it. I love the addition of it. I love the beats. It's something I wanted to collaborate more, but it's just not my main form of music, and it's basically become the form of music, right? I mean, it's the form, just the way rock and roll maybe was in the 60s and 70s, and then maybe pop took over in the 80s and 90s, like rock pop, and then now it's hip hop completely. But many years ago, at that same time I was kind of getting into hip hop, I read Mark Devlin. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the music researcher Mark Devlin, but he's a DJ that specialized in hip hop back when it was real vinyl, real hip hop, and he did okay for himself, honestly. But he noticed, I think he got to a place with it about 2008 when the music itself really took a turn. Like, he really felt like it was always pushing these sort of negative agendas of, sex and being, the thug life kind of idea. And it wasn't so much that was that bad. It was the fact that that's all there was. There was no other message. It was like that monopolization again. And so he wrote some books called Musical Truth, Volume 1, 2, and I think even has 3 out, but I haven't read 3 yet. But it really exposes some very interesting ties between the music industry and the military-industrial complex. I think it's worth reading. And I went back today to look at it because I couldn't remember. It might be in Musical Truth 2 where there's more about hip hop, but there is a chapter in Musical Truth 1 called The Systemic Degeneration of Hip Hop Culture. And probably many of you have heard this story, but if you haven't, there was a music executive that blew the whistle on the fact that there was a coordinated effort between privatized prison executives and hip hop and making it cool basically to break the law so that they could fill the prisons. Sounds like absolutely insane. Sounds like there's no way, that's too diabolical that could actually happen. And truth be told, this guy's identity I don't believe has ever been revealed, though I've seen some things recently that have possibly say that they might know who he is. So there might be some breaking news on that. But the truth is that is kind of what happened. I mean, hip hop became corporate. And this is when almost all art movements, music movements suck, is when it gets too successful, gets too big, and then it becomes corporatized. Okay. So what we're looking for, what I'm really hoping to inspire here is a paradigm shift in music. Going back from looking at these big acts and thinking, well, they're the best music. I'll listen to the people that are listening, getting the most listens or the biggest or being promoted. Those are the guys I want to listen to, the professional looking guys. I think we need to recognize that a lot of times at that point, they get infiltrated by the corporations. It changes, the energy changes. It doesn't matter. It can go pretty darn nefarious, as we've seen with PDiddy right now, that in reality, these guys are not good guys, okay? That they're with PDiddy, the allegations that are coming out are actually of sex trafficking, of, pushing drugs, of basically Epstein, blackmail of their artist. So this is not the first time that this has come up, okay? This is something you need to research if you haven't done this yet. But if you have researched it, then you're on board for a paradigm shift, because we need to recognize that there are a lot of really great, talented musicians who got locked out and maybe even quit, maybe even gave up music. And we got to get back and take back music. This is one of the things that Mark said shifted his paradigm. This is a quote from Mark's book, Mark Devlin. It says, "The gulf between what's really going on in this world and what we're being told is going on is absolutely immense." He said another realization that came to him was that this world is being run by unbelievably sick people. Those two phrases ring ever true with ever passing year. That certainly is the case for me. I think that's certainly the case for a lot of us. So when it comes to music, this is why I'm advocating for going back to the idea of local music, of, people that are actually in alignment, picking up their instrument and playing music from that place. And that we're starting, that we support that we're taking our time and money and attention away from more of this corporatized music and art movements, and go back to the grassroots. Go look at where are the local movements. Maybe the truth is we need to start the local movements, right? Things that are based in truth, things that are not about consumerism or commerce. Art used to be the mirror that we needed. It needed to be free of the demands of society so that it could be a true mirror to help society as a whole to do that inner work of being honest, right? We've become allergic to the truth at this point. And we don't even recognize that music and art is supposed to be in our face, waking us up, making us uncomfortable at times, right? And that's really good music. That's, getting us out of our comfort zone and making us grow and expand. The same thing is happening in the comedy world. It's like it's all becoming sterilized, right? And you have to go out and really actively seek and support the people that are still coming from a place of art, of pure art, of inspiration, of spirit. And I will say it has to be discerning, because it is possible that there's a difference between being supernatural and being of spirit, in my opinion. And there's a lot of supernatural things going on. And that's not what I'm speaking of. I'm speaking of the alignment, being in alignment with love, with community, with unity, with the virtues of truth and character and integrity, and listening to music that is coming from that place where, just like I would go out and actively seek improvisation musicians because they were more in the present moment. It's taking that even a step further. These people are, seeking music that is not only in the present moment, but coming from people who have taken the time to develop their character. And it's not something you can start last year and be there this year. It is a lifelong pursuit. And it's wisdom. Listening for music that has wisdom. It's a lost art at this point, and people don't even know to value it anymore. And my conjecture is there's a lot of people out there that have been doing that work, and they've been in an echo chamber of nothingness because they're not being uplifted. If anything, it's that Agent Smith, bring them down, take them off course. They've dealt with a lack of support, a lack of understanding, maybe even ridicule and being bullied. And at the very least, being gaslit, because this world is so upside down that we are celebrating things that shouldn't be celebrated. We're worshiping people that don't deserve our worship. And so taking that back, it's not about worshiping people, but it is about standing up and valuing yourself if you're one of those people who's been walking that walk, and offering what you can to the arena, offering the music and the art to recognize this is a call to you to recognize your value. Because in this world, you're not necessarily going to get pulled into nobody's going to come and pull you up into the upper echelons because the system is broken at this point. And even when there seems to be these movements of people that try to gather together and make something counteract it, it's almost like even that gets infiltrated when it gets too big. So you have to be willing to stand on your own and to know your value and to put your music and your art and your thoughts and your voice out there. And we need it. We need it because I'm not sure what's going on, but at the very least, my opinion is that we are in a frequency war, and that we are, it's unconventional, to say the least. So you might not recognize, might not be able to logically figure out why it's important, but you need to figure out how to be in alignment with spirit and be obedient to those things that you feel called to do. And by doing those, it's the ripple effect. It probably is, from an energetic place, having a far bigger impact than you will ever know, maybe from this side of the veil, right? So if you're feeling that today, if you're feeling that call, especially if you're feeling alone, if you're not getting any sort of encouragement, I'd just like to offer that to you today. And also thank you, because you've probably been walking a lonely road because of your integrity, because you've been developing character, because truth is a virtue to you. And in that way, I'd like to hear your music. So yeah, you can get in touch with me and share it. So, wow, this hour flies by, huh? So I guess I'll start wrapping up here because it's almost time to go. Turn down this a little bit, my little theme song here. So we didn't really get to go over my new production of How Can I Keep From Singing? But I'll be working on that a little bit more, and most likely either releasing that or another spiritual song for my video this Friday, because I'm going to be very much in it this week and staying focused on that place of unity, on my appreciation that when my mind's in alignment, I know that I'm safe, I know I'm cared for, and it's there for anybody. All we have to do is get in alignment. So you can always check me out on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram under my name, Lyndol Descant. And my website Lyndol, Lyndol.com. Has all my links as well. So that's a one-stop shop in case you need it to be a little easier to spell, to get there. I'm always happy to hear from people, either comment sections on my social media, or you can get in touch with me via my website, or what was the other way? Oh, yeah, I just wanted to offer that I do a 45-minute free consultation. If you have music you want to share, ideas for collaboration, possibly want to get some one-to-one in your own music training, I work with pianists, singers, songwriters. I'm great at music theory, and in particular, if you'd like to get going on improvisation, I can get you going quick, and it's something that you'll enjoy immensely. So let's see, there's only a few minutes left, and I believe I've made all my plugs. I'll be back here next Tuesday, 5 p.m. Eastern. But I think what I'm going to do right now is just do a little bit of singing improvisation for the last few minutes and do it as a form of prayer, just sending out high vibes today for our world, for anybody listening, for everybody not listening, for anybody who's struggling, for anybody who's in it right now, and mostly for a paradigm shift, because miracles are just around the corner. We just can't give up. Look up and the crowds roll away, and I'm free, and I know I'm safe. No,